Hello, my name is Jake Poole, and today I would like to talk a little bit about the smallpox virus. Back when the disease was prevalent in the 1700s, it was referred to as the speckled monster. Quite fitting and creative in my opinion. Some key points I'd like to discuss are listed below. I'm going to start with a little bit of the microbiology behind the disease and then move towards the more interesting and prevalent cases. So smallpox is caused by the variola virus. There are two forms of this virus, variola major and variola minor. The most well-known and the one we will be discussing today is variola major. There are other viruses in the orthopox genus, such as cowpox and monkeypox. These viruses are zoonotic, unlike smallpox, which can only be transferred person to person. The variola virus has double-stranded DNA and is double-enveloped, both which contribute to pathogenesis. So a person infected with smallpox can carry the disease for up to 43 days after initially coming in contact with it. During the incubation period, the host is asymptomatic and not contagious. Early symptoms include fever, body aches, fatigue, and sometimes vomiting. The initial rash appears on the mucous membranes in the nose and in the mouth, and at this point, the host is considered contagious. After a few days, these spots go away, and the rash begins to form on the face, quickly spreading to the arms and the legs. After this, these red spots fill with thick opaque fluid and become lesions. As you can see here on this host's hand, there are lesions which are indeed raised and firm to the touch, filled with this fluid that does contain the variola virus. So these lesions eventually form scabs, and the host remains contagious until the last scab falls off. The variola virus, the major form of it, has a mortality rate of about 30%. There are rare cases where the lesions are considered or classified as flat or hemorrhagic, and in these rare cases the mortality rate is 95%. And in variola minor, the other form of the virus, the mortality rate is very low, less than 1%. So smallpox enters the human host mainly through the respiratory tract. People who have smallpox spread the disease by sneezing or coughing. Droplets produced by these acts then spread to other people. It can also be contracted through skin-to-skin contact. The fluid in the lesions and in the scabs contains the variola virus, and the virus can then infect other hosts. So there are several ways in which society has tried to prevent this disease, one of the first being variolation. Variolation was the process of taking pus from a lesion of a mildly infected person and infecting a healthy person with it. Usually a mild case of smallpox did result in this. Therefore, it was quite risky, but it did provide lifelong immunity. The first vaccine was used in 1796 by Edward Jenner. This vaccine, unlike the modern one, used cowpox. He observed that a milkmaid who had previously come in contact with cowpox did not contract smallpox after this. So to test his theory, he took pus from a lesion of a milkmaid who had cowpox and infected an 8-year-old named James Phipps with it. However unethical, it did prove to be effective. The vaccine had many benefits over variolation, such as a person could not spread smallpox to others. It did not leave a scar, and the mortality rate was near zero. The modern form of the vaccine contains the vaccinovirus, an orthopox virus similar to that of smallpox, but much less harmful. The virus contained in the vaccine is alive and not weakened like those of many other antiviral vaccines. Therefore, many precautions had to be taken with those who were vaccinated to ensure that the vaccinovirus did not spread to others. The smallpox vaccine was no longer administered after 1972 because by this point the disease had been eradicated from the United States, and the risks of the vaccine far outweighed the benefits. And there was actually no possibility of contracting the disease, so there was no longer a need to vaccinate the general public. The primary treatment for smallpox is the smallpox vaccination. Depending on when the vaccine is administered determines its efficacy. So within 3 days, the vaccine will likely prevent the host from getting the disease. After 3 days, the vaccine is only able to lessen the symptoms. If the patient is already showing signs of the smallpox rash, the vaccine is completely ineffective. Another treatment option is the use of antiviral drugs. Few have been found to be effective against smallpox, and none have been tested on humans. There is no proven cure for those who already have the smallpox rash. Both the vaccine and the experimental drugs are stockpiled in the CDC in case of a future outbreak. So the next thing I want to talk about is the history of smallpox, the spread, and the notable cases, which are very, very interesting. So we can see here, smallpox dates back to the Egyptian Empire around the 3rd century BC. Research discovered smallpox-like lesions on some mummified remains. Some very interesting cases that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Due to increased trading, the virus was spread to China and India, where the first written reports of smallpox were discovered. The disease continued to spread from region to region via the eastern trade routes, and during the 7th century, the Arab expansion brought the disease into parts of Europe and northern Africa, as we can see here on this trade route. After in Spain and Portugal, the Crusades spread smallpox even further into Europe, and in the 11th century, European colonization of the Americas along with the slave trade during the 16th and 17th centuries brought the disease to the Native American people as well as the colonists. By the 18th century, smallpox was a very well-known and common disease in all parts of the world except for Australia. As you can see here, Australia was not on trade map. However, Great Britain's exploration of Australia ultimately brought the disease with it, and by the 20th century, smallpox had killed over 500 million people. So like I said before, smallpox was thought to date back to the early Egyptian Empire. Traces of smallpox lesions were found on mummified remains, the most significant being Pharaoh Ramses V. And he died relatively young in the 1100s BC. As you can see here, around the jawline, there are some larger lesions which resemble those of smallpox, leading the researchers to believe that the variola virus was indeed the cause of his death. In the 17th and 18th centuries, smallpox killed a number of reigning monarchs, including King Louis XV. Abraham Lincoln and Queen Elizabeth also contracted smallpox during their times in office. However, they lived to tell the tale. Benjamin Franklin was also an advocate for smallpox prevention after losing his son to the disease, and a smallpox outbreak occurred in 1978, the last known smallpox outbreak, and it resulted in the death of Janet Parker, a medical photographer, and the last known person to die from smallpox. So the vaccination continued in the United States until only the widespread cases were known in Africa. The last outbreak in the U.S. occurred in 1949. The last human to naturally contract smallpox was from Somalia, and the last recorded case of smallpox occurred in 1978 in the UK, which was Janet Parker, who died from a lab accident, not naturally contracting the disease. So the World Health Organization declared smallpox completely eradicated from the globe in December of 1979, and the declaration was signed in May of 1980. The only two facilities who are legally allowed to have the virus now to do research are the CDC here in the U.S. and the Russian State Center for Research on Virology and Bacteriology in the Russian Federation. Smallpox no longer occurs naturally in the environment. However, after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, stockpiles of smallpox could exist outside of the original research facility and could have been transported to other illegal bioweapon programs around the world. For this reason, the CDC is equipped to respond to a bioterrorism attack. They developed the Strategic National Stockpile. If there were ever to be another outbreak in the U.S., there would be enough vaccine to vaccinate every American. Which brings us to the society and culture portion of this presentation, and we're going to talk a little bit about biological warfare. Since smallpox can no longer be contracted naturally, the only possible outbreak or possibility of an outbreak of this virus would either be biological warfare or a lab accident. So smallpox has been used as a bioweapon before, and the most prevalent case really was during the French and Indian War, where the British soldiers gave the Native Americans who were allied with the French blankets that were infected with the smallpox virus. A lethal subsequent smallpox epidemic swept the native population because of this. And then another case would be the Soviet Union, who produced massive amounts of the smallpox virus during the Cold War, with the intention of using it as a bioweapon. As a result of this research, an outbreak occurred in 1971, which infected 10 people in a Russian city 15 kilometers away from the original research facility where this was taking place. The outbreak was contained by the Soviet Union and was never reported to the World Health Organization. In 1975, the world agreed to cease using bioweapons as a war tactic, although some groups did not comply, such as the Soviet Union. But the 1975 Biological Weapons Convention was a convention on the prohibition of development, production, and stockpiling of bacteriological and toxin weapons, and on their destruction. So moving forward, in May of 2010, a statue was built to celebrate the anniversary of smallpox eradication, which is the only disease to be globally eradicated from the world by the World Health Organization. Dr. Margaret Chan, the director of the World Health Organization, said, "The eradication of smallpox shows that with strong mutual resolve, teamwork, and an international spirit of solidarity, ambitious global public health goals can be attained." So because smallpox has been successfully eradicated from the globe, the human population has little to worry about. Research is still being done, and the health organizations around the world are ready for possible bioattacks. If there ever were to be another outbreak, the CDC has the capability to aid all Americans. So this ends my presentation today, and thank you guys for watching.